And so,
There we go. Mhm.
okay, so, and so because this is such a, has created so much anxiety in our society, our world, we thought it might be good to start with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Lord, we give thanks for this day and this opportunity for us to discern how we can live into our Christian belief of loving our neighbors as ourselves and caring for those in need. In this time when we are feeling anxious about so many things, help us to be instruments of peace and understanding that is so sorely needed in our world today. These things we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm so happy that we have the Reverend Dr. Gayle Fisher Stewart with us today. And I'll just tell you a little bit about her for those of you who don't know her. She is a priest in the Diocese of Washington and a native Washingtonian. And prior to accepting the call to ordained ministry, she retired from the DC Metropolitan Police Department as a captain, a motorcycle captain at that. She currently serves as the chaplain for the Tacoma Park Police Department. She has consulted with numerous organizations, such as the International City County Management Association, the United States Department of Justice, and a number of local governments, and has lectured at the university level. Throughout her career, Reverend Gayle has been ever mindful of the effects of racism in the criminal justice system, the education system, and various communities in which she has served. She has been an outspoken advocate for making the reign of God a reality for everyone, based on her belief that we don't have to live like this. She strongly believes that violence, economic inequalities, racism, and all the other isms and phobiasms are choices that we make in violation of the love of God showed at creation and continues to show in spite of human beings missing the mark. Reverend Gayle has authored several articles and books, including Preaching Black Lives Matters, which we did as part of our book club, Black Episcopalian and the Struggle for Inclusion, and her new book, Church Hurt, Reparations for My Soul, Healing Racialized Trauma. Sorry about that. She has served and continues to serve on diocesan committees and was the president of the Cromwell Copper chapter of the Union of Black Episcopalians for several years. Reverend Gayle lives in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and the love of her life is her son, David. And I have to share a little personal part that I had the pleasure and honor of meeting Reverend Gayle when I went on a pilgrimage to Alabama that's about, what, 7 years ago now? It was before
We went
COVID.
in 2019, a year before
Yes.
COVID. Yeah.
And it was an absolutely wonderful pilgrimage. And I've just been bugging her about doing it again because it's something I think everyone should experience and experience in that environment where you experience these very heart-wrenching things. But she has a way of helping you heal and reflect on God in that moment. So without further ado, I want to thank Reverend Gayle for being here, for doing this for us, and for the knowledge that we're going to learn. And I'll turn it over to Reverend Gayle.
Well, thank you, Jeanette. Thank you, everyone. I need to share my screen, so I'm going to do that now. There we go. Can everybody see that? Everybody got it? Well, we know something's working. So I do. I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to share this important information. And, if you have any questions, you can place it in the chat and we'll get to them. And it'll take a little over an hour if I can actually control myself, because sometimes I get rolling on this and want everybody to know all the information. This session is probably a little different from what you've seen in the media or have read about. By now, everyone knows the hot topics about Project 2025. But it is really important to understand how we find ourselves at this point where it is possible that our rights can be eroded and an authoritarian government can take over. And I know that word authoritarian or fascism frightens people. I mean, how could something like that happen here in this country? But believe me, it could. And it would not be the first time it's been tried. And it's also important to understand that the power of the people is much stronger than those in power or those who want to be in power. Those of us who truly believe in beloved community can make it happen, and we can make it happen in November and beyond. This presentation is one of our Freedom School series, and we've had the introduction to Project 2025, Women in Project 2025, Race and Fascism. They came for the schools. We've been this way before. And because there are some folks who have placed 2025 in the context of faith, Christian nationalism, and they believe that the government should be taken over by Christians who believe in the seven mountains theology. We actually have a presentation on that. So all of these are available on YouTube. And so if you're interested, I can send you all the links. And so as we do this, there's going to be some background information. How did we get here? What's the history? That history that some folks don't want us to know. And then we'll have a trip through the project and then how. If a conservative administration is elected, how will they make Project 2025 work? And so as we begin, I want everyone to take a deep breath and then let it out. Yes, we are concerned about Project 2025, but we can't be scared. We cannot be afraid. Scared people are not rational people, and we see that throughout Project 2025. Scared people are dangerous people. So I want you to breathe deeply because we've got this. What's in Project 2025 is nothing new. It's just taken almost 250 years for it to finally bloom because the will of the people, those who believe in freedom, have thwarted its mandates at every single turn, and we will do it again. So relax, be vigilant, and relax. And so we've got about 30 days to get this done. And our task is to get folks who are on the fence to move, because those who are going to vote for Trump are going to vote for Trump regardless of what you say, regardless of what the information is. And those who are going to vote for Harris are going to vote for Harris. And what we need to do is to help those who are undecided or who have made a decision that they are not going to vote. We need to help them recognize that it is important for them to vote. Trump has said he doesn't need any more votes, and he is absolutely correct. Harris's side is the underdog, and she has said that. And so we need those folks in the middle to make a decision to come over to the side where we can have a government where people actually thrive. And they will be on the side that will ensure that this country works for everybody. People who are going to do what they're going to do, what we have to really get them to understand is that portion of Project 2025 that relates to them. And so when you share this information, don't give them the entire plan because their eyes will just glaze over. Give them what affects them, the part of the plan that affects them personally. And trust me, there is something in this plan, something in Project 2025 that affects everyone you know. And then we have to ask, what is the role of the church? Of course, churches cannot endorse any candidate. However, churches can encourage their people to vote. And why? Because politics is about the decision-making process that allocates so-called scarce resources and services to the people. And as people of faith, we need to make sure that all of what is God's gets to God's people and is shared equitably. So now, How do we find ourselves at this place in history? We know that there have been attempts to deny or revise history, and there is a reason. From the very beginning of this country, there was a fear. The framers of the U.S. Constitution were concerned, and this is how long this has been an issue. The framers of the U.S. Constitution were concerned that a man, and it would be a white man because only rich white property men had the vote. They were concerned that one of them would attempt to take over this country and rule as a monarch, an authoritarian dictator, that he would abuse the office of the presidency. Patrick Henry, one of the framers of the U.S. Constitution, saw a fatal flaw in the office of the presidency that made the proposed constitutional system vulnerable, not merely to crisis, but to total collapse. And so at the Virginia Ratifying Convention in 1788, Henry argued the vast powers granted the president, serving as a singular head of the executive branch and the commander-in-chief of the military, and we'll get to this. This is what's called the unitary executive theory, that these powers rendered the nation vulnerable to a criminal. Did you hear me? To a criminal. These are Patrick Henry's words. To a criminal occupying America's highest office. That the president was a loaded gun and the Constitution's powers might be used for ill. That was in 1788. They believed that a criminal could actually occupy the highest office of this land. And so there is another issue that people don't want to hear, and some might think is playing a race card. However, as you go through the playbook for Project 2025, racism is at the heart of this movement. And regardless of what you think about President Obama, a lot of the backlash he faced was because of his race. I mean, how dare a Black person ascend to the highest position of this country? How dare a people who whites convinced themselves were inferior? How dare they ascend to a position of authority over white people? And so we have to face reality. And now that there is a possibility of a Black woman ascending to the highest office, folks are losing their minds. And then we also have to be aware of how decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court will assist in this conservative takeover. Right now, we have, out of the 9 justices, we have 6 who lean conservatively. And so we have to be aware of how they can influence decisions. And if we, the people, don't do what we are supposed to do to ensure a multiracial democracy, a country that works for all people this November and beyond, what has been in play for almost 250 years, the entire life of this country, what was predicted by Patrick Henry, just might become a reality. And it will be done legally using the Constitution and the law. And so this is not to frighten you, it is to enlighten you and to empower you. In the Supreme Court's recent 6-3 decision in Trump v. United States, the court held, under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of the presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his, and they do mean his, conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority. And he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts. There is no immunity for unofficial acts, but we have to be careful, like what's official and what's unofficial. And while this speaks to acts committed by a former president, the ruling naturally includes a sitting president. And this ruling, which was decided July 1st of 2024, means there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. The only constraints, and that's any president, any party, the only constraints are those the president self-imposes. The president can act as a queen or a king, a monarch, a dictator, and Donald Trump has vowed to be a dictator from day one. And in response to that ruling, Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote, "The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way, under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, he will be immune. Organizes a military dissenting coup to hold on to power. We already saw part of that. That person will be immune. What if he or she takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune. She keeps saying immune, immune, immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be." She said that is the majority's message today. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. And then Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who also wrote a minority opinion. "Thus, even a hypothetical president who admits to having ordered the assassination of his political rivals or critics, or one who indisputably instigates an unsuccessful coup, has a fair shot at getting immunity under the majority's new presidential accountability model." You know, at some point in our lives, we need to assess, we really need to assess everything we have been taught. Because as the ancestor Bell Hooks has said, all education is political. It has an agenda. What was the agenda as we were taught American history? Whose story was being told and why? Who controlled the narrative and why? As Edmund Burke reminded us, those who forget the past are bound to repeat it. And so before we get to the meat of Project 2025, we do need a little bit of history, because the concepts of Project 2025, again, are not new, and the ideas behind it are not new. They have always been in plain sight. And we keep hearing people question whether or not we are losing democracy. But the question we must ask is this: was this country ever meant to be the democracy we have been taught to believe it is? That's where history and background information come in. We have to put Project 2025 in context, because without that context, we become scared. With that context, we become empowered. So buckle up and breathe. It's going to be a bumpy ride. You know, as you read the entire plan, if you have done that, which is more than the 928-page document Mandate for Leadership. As you go through it, you will become aware that there are some key concepts that undergird everything. As of 2020, non-Hispanic white Americans were already a minority. It is projected that non-Hispanic whites overall will become a minority within the United States by 2025, 2045 rather. 2025 is coming, so that's 2045. I mean, so that's frightening to a lot of whites who believe they should rule the world, much less this country. And the Heritage Foundation has been taking a lead in that fight against the browning of America. And they've been doing it since, 1973. This browning of America what does that mean? U.S. births have declined by 2023 to their lowest level in more than 40 years. And it's continuing a 2-decade trend of Americans having fewer children. And according to the National Center for Health Statistics, the rate of U.S. women of childbearing age having babies is the lowest since the center began compiling statistics in 1960. And so why is this important to know? The birth rate has fallen below replacement level. That's the fertility level needed for one generation to replace itself. And so you've heard of the so-called replacement theory, where because of the birth rate issue, some people believe the left is using immigrant babies to replace American. When we say American, we mean white babies. And so Project 2025 was developed by the Heritage Foundation, which is an activist, conservative think tank that is based in Washington, D.C. It was founded in 1973, and it has been doing its thing since the Nixon administration. And it took a leading role in the conservative movement in the 1980s during the presidency of Ronald Reagan. And a lot of his policies were taken from Heritage Foundation studies, including the 1980s version of today's Mandate for Leadership, the 920 plus page book. The document, this Mandate for Leadership, it's not new. Okay, we saw the 1980s version with Reagan. It's just that this version has gotten a lot of attention because of the promotion of Project 2025 in the upcoming election. In fact, it is published every 4 years. We just didn't know about it. And so as we look at the Heritage Foundation, they have an enemies list. Anyone who does not believe as they do. So what is the goal, really, of the Heritage Foundation and those who believe in Project 2025? The goal is to create an authoritarian government, authoritarian rule by giving massive powers to the president, which the U.S. Supreme Court already has, and using the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, which in effect negates the system of checks and balances. Everyone and everything that does not fit into the box of white, male, straight, Christian, and of a specific conservative ideology is targeted. And so as we read the information, we have to do what English lit majors call a close read. We have to read and question because of a lot of what is written seems benign, but it is not. And so we have to do a close read. More than just read between the lines, we have to ask, what is it really saying? Who will it affect and how? And so by now, but why now? Why, if the Heritage Foundation has been doing this since the 70s and the Republican presidencies have used it, what's going on? In the words of Marvin Gaye, what is going on? One of the problems with the first form of federal government under the Articles of Confederation is that it had absolutely no power to quash civil disturbances. This was changed with the adoption of the U.S. Constitution, and we saw it in action in May 2020 in front of St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C., with the Black Lives Matter protest over the police murder of George Floyd. However, it is usually the local police and perhaps the National Guard, who are citizen soldiers, who are called in for civil disturbances. With a change in the law, the president would be able to call in the military to quash any and all protests, peaceful or otherwise. Folks who just want to stand in front of the White House and protest the current president. The way they want to change the law is that the president would have the power to call in the military to quash any and all protests. And right now, that is against the law. Those protests that you always see in front of the White House, The president could just stop them. And we've seen the military used in other countries ruled by dictators. And that's what the creators of Project 2025 want to do. They want to be able to use the military as it is used in other countries that are under authoritarian rule. And so the current law that prohibits all that is called the Posse Comitatus Act, and it bars federal troops from participating in civilian law enforcement except when expressly authorized by law. And this is a law that is 143 years old and embodies an American tradition that sees military interference in civilian affairs as a threat to both democracy and personal liberty. A conservative presidency would change that because there are gaps in the law's coverage that leave the law open to abuse. So if the local police fail to quash peaceful demonstrations, or the police chief says, I'm not sending my troops out there because the folks are protesting peacefully, the president can send in the military, and they have a different mindset. They are warriors, and warriors do not belong in our communities. There's also the Insurrection Act of 1807, and this is a federal law that empowers the President of the United States to actually deploy U.S. military and federalized National Guard troops within the United States in particular circumstances. And we've those of us who grew up during the protests for the Vietnam War, when martial law was instituted, we saw that. But it wasn't just the president who could do it. You needed the Congress to also say that this was needed. And so what can happen is that with the recent Supreme Court decision granting the presidency wide powers, any president can call up the military. And so anyone who dares to protest against the president for whatever reason can be subject to arrest or worse. And so how would most of the people you know, be affected by and with a conservative administration? This is where you get your information to speak with people. With Project 2025, thousands of nonpartisan civil servants will be reclassified as Schedule F. If you work for the federal government, not a contractor, but a civilian employee, you are in one of several classifications in terms of pay and protections. The majority of people are general schedule, GS. There's also wage grade, then there's senior executive service, and then the executive level. Executive level are political appointees appointed by the president. Some of them are confirmed by Congress, and they serve at the pleasure of the president. And they know that when they are appointed, for example, say secretaries of federal agencies, they know that they serve at the pleasure of the president. Under Project 2025, employees under general schedule can be reclassified as Schedule F and then serve at the pleasure of the president, which means they can be fired at will if they don't bend to what the president wants. And so this could be a lower level employee in the Department of Health and Human Services who determines eligibility for the food stamp program, SNAP. Under Schedule F, they now serve at the whims of the president. And if their values don't align with the administration's, they can be fired. At a minimal, 50,000 employees could be affected. They would not be subject to merit protection. They would have to sign a loyalty oath to the president, not to the government, not to the Constitution, but to the president. And the rationale for doing this is the false claim that civilian federal employees are not aligned with the majority of the American people. But you know something? These people are not supposed to be aligned with any side. These are people who are just doing their jobs according to their position descriptions. They are supposed to be nonpartisan. But the goal of the right with a conservative administration is to have thousands of political sycophants doing the will of a conservative administration. Schedule F was put in place, but never acted on under the previous Trump administration, and it was repealed by Biden. And so, do you know anyone who works for the federal government? Their job could be affected and they don't even know it. And again, federal employees could be forced to sign a loyalty oath to the president. We are also seeing more and more hurricanes and other forms of destructive weather. You know, we had the Hurricane Helene, and we have seen mass destruction in areas that folks said, you know, we never get hurricanes here. Whole cities wiped out. And yet the goal of Project 2025 is to eliminate the Environmental Protection Agency and to dismantle the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And what would happen is that it would be privatized. It would become a moneymaker for investors, and people will die because they will make the determination whether or not it's in their best interest to notify people that a hurricane is coming. It will be privatized. And we know when things are privatized, it's about maximizing profit. And then when it comes to the Department of Agriculture, there is this conservative belief that the people who benefit, for example, from welfare and from food stamps are freeloaders, that they are people who don't want to work, and that the money of conservatives is being transferred to support welfare queens and other lazy people, also known as people of color. And so they want to eliminate feeding programs in schools. They want to reform food stamps. They want to re-implement work requirements. They want to reform state voucher programs. What they want to do is dismantle safety nets for people. But what we do know is that all of these safety net programs were created for white people. Not one program has ever been created for people of color. Food stamps was created in the Kennedy administration for Appalachian whites, not Black people. There are no programs that have been developed solely for people of color, not one, not even affirmative action programs. And so as we look at Project 2025, a conservative administration would eliminate the Department of Education and return all control to the states. And on its face, it might not seem to be a problem, except as we look at the racial climate of this country and how states denied equal education to Black students in the past and now under separate and unequal. They called it separate but equal, but it was separate and unequal. I mean, so that is the problem. States would be able to do whatever they want with no federal oversight. The Department of Education provides that oversight. There is the false belief by some on the conservative side that our public schools are encouraging children to change their gender, and that schools are teaching a revisionist version of American history that makes children, particularly white children, ashamed of this country. Neither is true. Thousands of people have had their college loans, their college student loans canceled. Under Project 2025, this would all end because there is the belief that if you owe, you pay, and you pay into perpetuity, that you pay forever. And you see that now, because if you talk to people, I've been gathering data from folks who have student loans, and one woman said, you know, I've been paying for 10 years. I pay $800 a month, and $8 goes to principal. $8 out of $800 a month goes to principal. She says, I will never pay this off. If you took everybody who has a student loan who's been paying for about 10 years and you just looked at the money they've paid, they have actually paid off their loans, but it's the interest. It is the added interest that keeps them paying into perpetuity. And so all student loans would be turned over to private loan handlers, and some have already been turned over to private loan handlers, which would add to the cost because their goal is to make money from the interest. The amortization program, the system we have for loans in this country, how principal and interest are determined, is simply a ripoff, and it just keeps people in debt. And so the other thing they want to do is to eliminate Head Start. Eliminate Head Start because they think, well, that's for children of color. But if you walk around, you will see that there are a lot of white kids in Head Start because it is a good program. But again, all of these allegedly safety net programs that the conservatives believe are for people of color, they want to eliminate. The Department of Justice will be weaponized to go after the president's enemies. We've already heard Trump say there are certain people who should be prosecuted. And with the powers given him, he will be able to go after anyone he wants. Last week, Mitt Romney gave an interview because he knows that he's on Trump's hit list. And he said he's afraid for his life and for the lives of his family. People are running scared because they know there will be no controls over a conservative president and what he can and cannot do. No one will be safe. Trump has also called for a purge-like day. Some of you remember the dystopian movies Purge, where people went crazy for one day and just did what they wanted to do. They could kill, they could rape, they could murder, and then the next day everything would go back to normal. Trump has called for a purge-like day for policing, where the police will be able to use whatever force necessary to control crime. Anything they want to do, allegedly to control crime. Trump has called for this. There will be a complete overhaul of the Department of Justice to be used at the whims of the president. This is one of the agencies where Schedule F would take effect, making law enforcement officers employees of the president. Trust in the justice system is already shaky in this country, and to weaponize the Justice Department would adversely affect how the rule of law, law enforcement, and policing will be viewed, particularly in the Black and Brown communities. So do you know someone in federal law enforcement? Do you know someone in local policing? Their positions could be weaponized. And then when it comes to our LGBTQIA siblings, they would have absolutely no protections anywhere in this country. They could be fired at will. Businesses could legally discriminate against them. If you don't want to sell your house to a gay couple, that would be absolutely fine because they believe that if it is your property, you ought to be able to sell or not to sell to whomever you please. Gender affirming healthcare would be illegal. And there would be an official definition and concept of family. And we've heard the term nuclear family, and it is a 20th century invention, meaning a family with heterosexual parents and children. That would be the official definition and concept of family. It would be written into law, and it would be biological family or adopted children living together in a single household. But how many of us were raised by people who were not related to us by blood? How many of us have raised children not related to us by blood? How many of us have been single and have raised children? That would be out the window in this country. And you ask, well, how could that be done? It can be done if they have the control of the law. And all of this harkens back to eugenics. Eugenics is an immoral and pseudoscientific theory that claims it is possible to perfect people and groups through genetics. and the scientific laws of inheritance. Eugenicists use an incorrect and prejudiced understanding of the work of Charles Darwin and Gregor Mendel to support the idea of racial improvement. How do we improve the race? How do we ensure that whiteness is the standard? And so, in their quest for a perfect society, eugenicists labeled many people as unfit, including ethnic and religious minorities, people with disabilities, the urban poor, and LGBTQ individuals. Discussions of eugenics began in the late 19th century in England and spread to other countries, including this country. And most industrialized countries had organizations devoted to promoting eugenics by the end of World War I. Under Project 2025, the Secretary of Health and Human Services should proudly state that men and women are biological realities that are crucial to the advancement of life sciences and medical care, and that married men and women are the ideal natural family structure. And this sounds benign. This sounds okay because all children have a right to be raised by the men and women who conceived them. Did you get that? By the men and women who conceived them. So what happens to adoption? What happens to IVF? All of this is possible under Project 2025. And then as we look at our military and our veterans, after everything our military has done and continues to do for us, a conservative administration would further limit disability benefits. Folks go to war, they come back injured, they come back traumatized. A conservative government wants to reduce the benefits to our troops. And then anything that has to do with equity, diversity, inclusion will be eliminated from every single law we have. They're going to delete the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights. Those terms will be removed from every federal law, agency regulation, contract, grant, other regulations, and piece of legislation that exists. That will happen on day one of a conservative administration taking over. And so why is all this being planned? What is going on? Trump in April 2024 says there's a bias against white people in this country, and that's a problem. People believe that white people are being unfairly treated in this country, and they need to reverse everything that smacks of equity. Everything that smacks of equity. And of course, we've heard everything about reproductive rights, and they will be curtailed even further. And it has everything to do with patriarchy. Everything to do with patriarchy. Remember that nuclear family, that traditional family? The woman under the traditional family, that nuclear family grouping is to be covered by the husband. Some of you may have grown up during a time where we had a term called coverture. Coverture was based in English law, and it held that no female person had a legal identity. At birth, a female baby was covered by her father's identity, and then when she married, by her husband's. The husband and wife became one. Remember the Bible, because there is a biblical context to all of this, and that one was the husband. And so as a symbol of subsuming of this identity, women took the last names of their husbands. They were called femme coverts, covered women. They had no rights as women. And so some of us actually remember when women could not buy a house in their own name, could not get a loan in their own name, right? If you were lucky as a single woman to have a credit card in your name, somehow magically, once you were married, the credit card came issued in your husband's name. It had Mrs. and your husband's name. Under Project 2025 and that whole concept of what a nuclear family is, they want to go back to that, where women don't have any rights. And as part of this, and as part of limiting reproductive rights, Project 2025 will revive an 1893 law, the Comstock Act. And this act was to really to eliminate or regulate vice, materials considered immoral, and have them stop them from being transported via the post office. Anthony Comstock was the U.S. Postal Inspector, for which the act is named. And if this act is revived, it would make the transportation of medicines and instruments used for abortions illegal. However, as you know, there are many gynecological conditions and procedures that use the very same medicines and instruments that have nothing to do with abortion. I mean, how many women use birth control pills to regulate their periods as opposed to contraception? How many women have had D&Cs after a miscarriage, not an abortion? How many women have had fibroids and have had a D&C, not for abortion, but to help rid the fibroids? The law would cause physicians to second guess themselves in providing needed medical care. Again, it's all about patriarchy. It's all about control of women's and girls' bodies as property of men. In 2023, Virginia legislators voted to table a bill that would have prohibited authorities from using a search warrant to seize menstrual data stored on a computer or other electronic devices like your cell phone or your smart watch. Bill was tabled. Didn't get rid of it, but it's tabled to be brought up at a later time. And then how many people do you know are on Medicare? Or you are on Medicare? There will be more privatization of Medicare, which means lower benefits, fewer benefits for you, and more money in the pockets of those who would manage the program. There will be changes to Medicaid to include cuts to programs that benefit children. And the media has reported that Social Security will be cut, but not quite. It will be privatized. So there will be fewer benefits, and stockholders will benefit from those changes. A conservative administration would tamp down unions because the goal will be to maximize financial benefits, again, to owners and stockholders. Capitalism has always been against unions because unions cost owners and stockholders. That's why they want to eliminate regulation. That's why a conservative administration in previous times has always lowered the tax rate for businesses. And so you don't want a union who says, well, if you're going to lower the tax rate, that means more money for you. So why can't you share that money with your workers? That's not what it's all about. Capitalism is about having a small group of people who benefit, who are able to maximize their profit from their businesses. It's not about the people. It is about the owners. How do they maximize profit? Not get some profit, but maximize. And when you maximize profit, you negatively affect the people who actually help you get that profit. And then when we talk about immigration, mass deportations of undocumented people, regardless of how long they've been in this country. And so we've heard the language of oppression used to describe human beings, that they're vermin, that they're poisoning the blood. This language dehumanizes, which is the very first step toward extermination. Remember the slide that said we can't restore Western civilization with someone else's babies? This is pure racism. And it is not about crime or immigrants taking jobs or housing. This is about the browning of this country. And when we talk about racism, what we have to remember is that when the Nazis came, when the Nazis were trying to figure out their final solution regarding the Jews and other people, when they were trying to figure out what to do, they came to this country to learn from the American system of racism and segregation. They were told, why don't you just treat the Jews like we treat the Negroes? And why? The racial history of this country is not pretty. And that is why people want it banned, don't want it taught. The United States was considered by Germany and South Africa to be an innovative world leader in the creation of racist laws. That's part of our history that folks don't want taught. And when we really look at immigration, how many people know that undocumented workers pay $1 billion a year in taxes? Undocumented workers pay $1 billion a year in taxes. Although they cannot access services their taxes paid for. They pay for unemployment compensation. They pay into Medicare. They pay into all of that stuff that we pay, but they cannot access it because they are undocumented. So how do they do that? How do they pay taxes? The Internal Revenue Service will issue them an EIN, Employer Identification Number. They can't get a Social Security number, but the Internal Revenue Service will issue them an Employer Identification Number. And so every year they file taxes using that number. And you have to ask, well, why are they paying taxes? Why are they paying taxes if they're undocumented? Because we're told that they're not paying taxes, that they are a drain on our society. When they go in and they have decided that they want to apply for citizenship, the first question they are asked is, how have you supported yourself for the number of years you have been in this country? And they pull out their tax records. They pull out their tax records. And so immigrants are not a burden on this country. In fact, if we sent them all back, if we got rid of them, mass deportation, our economy would lose $1 billion a year that they pay through taxes. Okay. So again, race is at the heart of Project 2025. And we know that 52% of white evangelical Protestants, the good Christian people, believe that the United States becoming a majority non-white nation represents a negative development for the United States. Protestants, Christians, good Christian folks, have a problem with Black and brown people in this country. Well, anybody who's not white. I mean, these are some of the major issues, and there are so many more. But again, how did we get here? After all, if we are students of history, this is nothing new. It's just that it's been thwarted in the past by committed lovers of freedom who wanted this country to be a democracy. Again, was this country ever meant to be a democracy? We have been taught it is supposed to be. I mean, this country in a couple of years will be 250 years old. So how do we find ourselves in this place where it seems that the advancements in equality and equity that have been made are being turned back? It is because we have to think it is because people who have fought for civil rights and gender rights and equity rights and women's rights and LGBT rights and disability rights, we have fought for them and we had to fight for them. Why? Because they are not in the Constitution. They're nowhere in the Constitution, the main body of the Constitution. When the U.S. Supreme Court rules in ways that throw out these rights with the words original intent, they use those words, original intent of the framers of the Constitution. They are absolutely correct. The rights that we enjoy are not included in the original document. And so this is where history is important, a history many of us are not taught and which is not taught in our schools. And so we need to know the history of how this constitutional government came into being and why, because you will see how the Heritage Foundation and other conservatives have just been following a guide that is at the heart of this country. Those rights were not there. They had to be added by the amendments. If you look at the U.S. Constitution, women are not included, Native Americans are not included, and Blacks are included as 3/5 of a human being.
That's right.
When was that ever changed? When was that ever changed? And so we have been taught that the colonists wanted freedom, but what they really wanted was to be free from interference of England to do what they the author of Forced Founders, among other books, points out that in the 1760s, the British government started tightening its economic control of the American colonies. But before all that, in 1763, the British Parliament issued a proclamation that seriously upset some of the American gentry. And it was called the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And what it did, it prevented land speculators, one of whom was George Washington, who wanted a big chunk of the Ohio Valley. It prevented them and others from claiming ownership of native lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. The founding fathers wanted to do what they wanted to do, and it came to war. It came to fighting the Revolutionary War. And then there is something else. 10 years after the Revolutionary War, that was fought for the freedom of some people, George Washington, who was not yet president, received a letter from a former Army officer begging him to get back into action. Why? Because the farmers in Massachusetts were protesting high taxes. These taxes were to pay for the war, 1776, the elites waged against England. And the regular folks weren't having any of it, and they began shutting down county courts charged with making sure that the taxes were paid and also taking the property of those who did not pay. The elite, the property class, was up in arms. I mean, how dare these people upset our lives, upset our livelihood, get involved in our business? And so the elite, the white property class, wanted these protests to stop, and they believed the federal government was too weak to do it. Under the Articles of Confederation, not the U.S. Constitution, because that had not come into being, the federal government did not have the power to tamp down citizen protests. It did not. It could not do that. Again, remember the protest in front of St. John's Lafayette Square, Black Lives Matter in 2020. Trump wanted to call in the military, but the law prohibited him. And so they did a workaround and called in the National Guard from predominantly red states. In 1786, the federal government did not have the ability to tax, enforce federal laws, or keep a standing army, and something had to be done. The Articles of the Confederation tied together 13 independent republics that we call states, and they did their own thing. The Confederation Congress, made up of representatives of the states, could sign treaties, print money, and declare war, but they could not stop citizens from protesting their treatment. And so the elite wanted to protect their property, and the possession of property was the primary goal of that society. The possession of property, the protection of property is the primary goal of the body of the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution was needed to protect the interest of the rich, the well-born, and the national well-being according to the rich, and that would be done by throttling the power of the working class majority. To do this, the country needed to be less democratic, limit the people who had voice in governing this country. But why? Why were the regular people, and these were, of course, regular white people, why were they protesting? Remember, wars are expensive and someone has to pay for them. And it was certainly not the money class. Their goal is to keep their money and make more of it. Foreign countries that financed the Revolutionary War wanted their money. Rich folks in America who financed the Revolutionary War wanted their money. So it falls upon the folks who work for their money every single day to pay the debt. And so in 1786, there was something called Shays' Rebellion. Daniel Shay was a farmer who was threatened with the loss of his farm because he could not pay the taxes levied. Shay led the rebellion, the citizen protest, and the elite, the property class, the gentry said that the farmers were being greedy and envious. The states did take some steps to confront and control the outbreaks. And what is interesting is that the local police, because we did have a form of local policing then, were indemnified if they killed or injured protesters. We still see that today on qualified immunity. And so, yes, there were steps taken, but for the elites, those who wanted to protect their money, their property, it wasn't enough. They wanted their lives and their property protected from we the people, and they wanted the federal government to do it. And so we have the Constitutional Congress, 1787, where the representatives of the states, most of them moneyed in property, all male, white, enslavers, met in Philadelphia in 1787 to form the Constitutional Congress. The goal was to create stronger federal government, and we see the form we have today. The Constitution was ratified in 1788, and George Washington was selected president because it was thought he would not be that tyrant. And as I said in the beginning, there was a concern that the president could be or become a tyrant even back then. There was the Electoral College back then. It is not a recent creation. And only 6% of the population of close to 4 million people was eligible to vote. Again, the question is whether or not this country was ever meant to be the democracy we were taught it was. To vote in the first election, you had to be male, white, and property. So that left out women, Blacks, Native Americans, and the majority of white males. And of course, anyone thought not to be a citizen. The Electoral College was in play and has always been in play. And the purpose of the Electoral College has been and continues to be to control the power of the popular vote. The issue that kept coming up in the discussions as the Constitution was developed was that there was too much democracy with the Articles of Confederation. There was too much freedom. The farmers had a right to protest their treatment, and James Madison, who would go on to become the 4th president and was the main creator of the Constitution, and others, was on the side of limiting democracy, limiting participation of the people in the governing of this country. It was hot when they met in Philadelphia. It was August and the windows were covered and they were closed, so folks outside would not know what was going on. And how do we know what happened and that there was a concern about democracy? James Madison would recreate the meetings at night. He would write notes at home, and his notes were hidden until 50 years after his death. And they are held today at the Library of Congress. And so we know what happened then. They wanted the people, the regular folks, to have as little as possible to do with governing. Alexander Hamilton wanted no elections. Everyone would be appointed by the elite, and there would be specific requirements for those selections. And again, if you study the U.S. Constitution before the addition of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, you will see that government was instituted for the protection of property, to include human property, human beings, the enslaved. Property was the main concern of the elites, and they wanted power to quell civil disorder, to include future slave revolts. And why? Because revolts, civil disturbances, are bad for business, bad for capitalism. They wanted to protect their property, and they wanted foreign investment, foreign business, and you can't do that when folks are protesting out in the streets. And so, as a result of all of this maneuvering, we have the current form of government we see today. But in truth, the only place the people have a real say is in the House of Representatives, because the Senate and the office of the president can overrule. And then there are the courts, the Supreme Court, which can also overrule or rule against the people, as we have seen. And so the House of Representatives, a bill comes in the House of Representatives, it can be knocked down by the Senate, it can be knocked down by the president, and it can be knocked down by the Supreme Court. The courts, the presidency, and the Senate control how much voice the people have through their representatives. And if you look at it, the court, it has always been their role to control the popular voice. And if you look at the history of Supreme Court decisions, they have not been about freedom at all. It wasn't until the Warren Court between 1953 and 1969 when we began to see decisions that upheld the rights of the people, the regular people. So what we see the Supreme Court doing today, that's always been their practices. And we have to remember that senators were not chosen by the vote of the people until 1913. Senators were not chosen by the vote of the people until 1913. With the inclusion of the 17th Amendment, we had to amend the U.S. Constitution in order to allow people to elect their senators. It is the amendments to the Constitution that gave people voice. It wasn't until the 14th Amendment that African Americans were defined as full human beings or citizens under the law. However, remember, in the main document, we're still 3/5 of a person. Again, it is because of the people. We have civil rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, rights for the disabled. You can keep naming them, because if people say we are better than this, and we need to say the same thing now, that we are better than what the conservatives want to do to this country. So when we talk about democracy, exactly what are we talking about? What are we saying? It was not until the middle of the 20th century that our definition of democracy include all or nearly all adult citizens. And we see that and we see that number being decreased. If you are convicted of a felony, you lose your right to vote. Why is that? Why do you lose your right to vote? Because folks want to eliminate the number of people, keep the number small, right? And so as you see with this definition, that it is a system of government in which laws, policies, leadership, and major undertakings of a state or of a polity are directly or indirectly decided by the people, a group historically constituted by only a minority of the population. A minority of the population. That's how our democracy was defined. It was not until the mid-20th century that we started including the majority of all adult citizens. And so we see early voting suppressed, polling places closed, voter ID requirements. This is all to eliminate the voice of the people, to limit who has a say in the running of this country. We really had the opportunity to have a fuller democracy. 1776, we could have had one. During Reconstruction, you could have had one. During the Civil Rights era, we could have one. But with the Voting Rights Act, I mean, think about it. You have to have a Voting Rights Act to say that certain citizens are eligible to vote. Shouldn't that come with citizenship? Eh? But we could have, at all these times, had a democracy we say we have. And so we have an opportunity to kind of turn it around in November, remembering that the primary goal of the Constitution was to protect property and to make this country attractive for capital, to make it attractive for investment, to make money, to bring money. And when we look at some of the initiatives of Project 2025, like deregulation, use of federal lands for mining, a pushback on electric vehicles and wind power, it's all about money. It's all about power. And again, why the Bill of Rights? Because the people said the Constitution, the country is not working for the majority of the people. And so how do the elite do what was planned from the very beginning, from the ratification of the U.S. Constitution? How do they govern by fiat? How do they take it over? How do they limit democracy? How do they place cronies in positions throughout the federal government? Project 2025, as I said, is nothing new. It's just taken this long, and we've been fed a pig in the poke, as my grandmother would say. We haven't paid attention to what was going on. This is a planned takeover that begins November 6, 2024, and it is in full force January 20th, 2025. And as we look at the Heritage Foundation, and it's probably more than 100 very well-financed conservative organizations who truly believe that it is not enough to win the election, but they have to have people in place who will carry out the plan. And so there are 4 pillars to Project 2025. And with those 4 pillars, the 180-day playbook, the mandate for leadership, is just one of the pillars. But let's look at the policy agenda. The promises that they are going to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life, but it's their definition of family. They will dismantle the administrative state, that is the federal government. They will defend the nation's sovereignty, America first, the heck with everybody else. And they will secure God-given individual rights to live freely. Whatever your religion tells you can do it. So if you want to discriminate against people, if that's what your God tells you can do, then you can do it. And so the other pillars, it is slick and it is smooth as glass, and on its face seems benign. And if we look at the policies, if we look at this, marriage is important. However, there are people who don't want to be married. Why should they be penalized? Why should they be penalized, right? And as we look at this whole issue with religion, we already have states. For example, Louisiana has already passed a law to put the 10 Commandments in the schools, to post them all over the schools, right? Under Project 2025, mandatory prayer will be returned to schools, and laws that give people the right of association will rule the day. So if it's against my religion, I don't have to do it. What they want is to also become a Christian theocracy, which means that anybody who is not Christian, you're in trouble. And so what has been going on? For the past 2 years, people have been submitting their resumes. How do you get this cadre of people to come in on day one? For the past 2 years, people have been submitting their resumes to be vetted for jobs in the administration. There's an online academy to learn the skills necessary to be successful. And then rather than focus on skills, there are questions that ask, what person has influenced your political ideology most? Or what book has influenced your political ideology? The Heritage Foundation already has a bank of like-minded candidates ready to flood the federal government and political appointments on day one. And so a question you should be asking by now is, how will all this be accomplished? After all, we do have a Congress. I mean, there are rules, there are laws, and it's called the unitary executive theory. How is that done? It's done by executive orders. And executive orders are nothing new. They're promulgated every day. but usually without fanfare. For this to happen, where we will have a coup by executive order, this legal theory rejects the idea that the government is composed of three separate branches with overlapping powers of checks and balances. Instead, the theory's adherents argue that Article 2 of the United States Constitution gives the president complete control of the executive branch, the office of the president, and all federal agencies, which means that Congress cannot empower agency heads to make decisions or restrict the president's ability to fire them. Reagan administration lawyers developed this theory as they sought to advance a deregulatory agenda. This will restore the president's authority to bypass Congress. Trump has said he doesn't need Congress. And under unitary executive theory, he is absolutely correct. And then there is another power, and it's called impoundment power. Nixon gave this up in 1974. Impoundment is an act by a president of not spending money that has been appropriated by the U.S. Congress. Thomas Jefferson was the first president to exercise the power of impoundment in 1801. It's not new. So Congress can pass a budget, and the president can refuse to allow the money to be spent until Congress bends to the will of the president. And the president will have that power. Will have that power. And so as we are girding our loins to take back what is ours, to make this country into a democracy that has so far evaded us, this quote from Reagan, and I know I'm quoting Reagan, is appropriate, and is that freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. We're going to have to defend the way of life we want for our great-grandchildren. And it'll start right here, right now with you as you share this information, as you continue to gather more information. The victory is going to be ours because you will share what you have learned. And so you're going to share the information. You're going to vote like your life depends on it because it does. You're going to vote up and down the ballot. Every single position is important because we have seen in some states where school boards have put together a conservative slate. We say we won't worry about the top of the ticket. We'll worry about the local ticket, and we will start putting our people in place at the local level, for mayors and city council members and school board members. So we have to pay attention to all of that. And then once we do what we're supposed to do, we need to hold representatives accountable. Too often we just vote and let them do their own thing. And so when they do their own thing, then we get angry. But we need to have a list of what we want, what we need as citizens of this country, ready to present to everybody on January 20th. And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So let me see. Let me stop sharing. How do we get the links to the YouTubes? I will send them to Jeanette. I will send them all to Jeanette. Okay. She already has a PDF of the PowerPoint, and this is being recorded, and this will also be available to you. But I will send you all of the links to the other PowerPoints. I will do that. Let's see. Okay. Are there any other questions? Any other questions? Are you ready to go vote? Yes. And take people with you. Take people with you. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, to all of you who are sharing this, please share. And as it's indicated, I will send the links for the other ones to also share because this is nothing new. It's just that, yeah, folks are getting upset and they want their country back. And no, this is a country that can work for everybody, that we can actually have beloved community if we do what we are called to do. Okay. So
I
have
want,
I?
I
Mhm.
think this is excellent, Reverend Gayle, and we just want to thank you. We thought it might be easier if you have questions, if you want to put them in the chat, but we can also unmute you if you want to if you want to ask your question. I think it'd be good to raise your hand and then we can recognize you and unmute you. But this is just amazing. I mean, I learned so much that I did not know. I truly appreciate it. I really
Thank
do.
you. I mean, that's the history they don't want taught, right? I mean, whoever knew that George Washington was a land speculator and wanted to go to the Ohio Valley and just take most of that land for himself. And then what would he have done with that land but put more black people on it to work it,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So it's all of that, all of that. And thank you, Pamela, who has been translating. Thank you. There are times I wish I had paid more attention in school when I took Spanish. Uh, you
So
know?
did anybody have questions? If you can raise your hand, I will unmute you, and I guess I can unmute all. I can see I haven't
Will
muted.
the sharing be to anyone who signed up, of course, and those who didn't sign up? So anybody who needs to see this.
Yeah, we're gonna post it on we have a Facebook page, and also St. Paul's is gonna post all this information on their Facebook page too. So
Yeah.
are there
And
other questions people want to ask?
Eric said, is this division part of our post-COVID life of isolation? I think it just became more apparent during COVID, and of course, folks who were protesting against wearing masks and the closing of schools and getting vaccinated, it just came up more. But it's been here. It has been here, and um, in the video, we've been this way before. It shows the 5 times this has been attempted before, and how the people have tamped it down. So even taking over and having an autocratic government, this is not the first time. This is not the first time. Okay. Anything else?
Okay, so
I
we've
just
unmuted everybody, I think.
Is there any way
Yeah.
this information can be given to PBS or other independent to share with the thing about it, if folks actually go to those stations, a lot of it is you have to kind of piece it together. But they've been sharing it. It's just that some of the folks who need to hear it don't listen to those stations. Don't listen to those stations. There is also a podcast. It's called Scene on Radio. It's like 5 different seasons where they just deal with the history of this country and capitalism and racism, and they actually go through how during Reconstruction, and you remember, during Reconstruction, we had the most Black representatives and senators that we ever had, and how folks just said, "Oh no, we can't have that," and they did Wilmington, North Carolina. They basically just burn folks out. Like, no, you all are in charge, and we'll just burn you out. We'll just burn you out. And so they're sharing that information that is not taught. That's not taught in our schools. But the information is there, and it's up to us to share it. And as I said at the beginning, we kind of call this series the Freedom Schools. Freedom Schools were begun in 1960s to educate, particularly Blacks in the South, on their rights, because it was needed. And so we put together these so that folks will know what all of this is about and why it's so, so important that people understand the why and the where and the how. Because It's all in place. They will use the laws, they will use the Constitution already in place to do what they want to do. Sounds like
Yeah.
the draft. Okay, so when you talk about the draft, part of that is that schools that receive federal funding which are really public schools and military schools, folks from the military can go in and pump up the military. It's not that folks will be drafted, but they can start recruiting in high schools, according to 2025. Okay, they can do that, and you notice it's schools receiving federal money and then include private schools, because a lot of our private schools are faith-based, and so they can say, no, you can't come here. You can't come here. Okay.
Yeah. I just have one comment, if I may. I want to say thank you, Reverend Gayle, for this presentation. And just listening to it, it made me realize that, or confirm that all the action that have been taking place, starting with the book banning, starting with the reproductive rights, all those things are not done in isolation,
No.
and then it makes me wonder what is the forum in which these people who support these actions, how do they get their information? And I think it leads to how well they're organized, right? And so for us, we are not that good at organizing, having a plan, knowing what it is. And so, I mean, the Heritage Foundation has been doing this for years. And it's just in 2024, we're becoming aware of it, conscious of it, and also how tenuous our democracy is, that we need to be more alert and to defend it. And so I thank you for that, because, I mean, a lot of things just seem so innocuous, right? It is subtle. It is our rights. But what are the rights? And I think also is that the rights of the minority dictate what happens to the majority.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, this is fascinating. Thank you.
It is. Thank you. And as I said, the Heritage Foundation and their academy, ProPublica, they had really, really, really good hackers. And so they got into their academy and downloaded all 28 hours of their academy videos. And so I can also send you the link with that. Not that you want to sit down and watch them all, but you might want to see that the type of information they're giving to folks who want to work for the administration. So folks have been working overtime, but they had to wait till somebody hacked, because those videos just didn't come up. They took time to develop, and folks have been going on. And in fact, be careful when you go on to the Heritage Foundation, because I am now a member. I just don't give them my money. But I want to know what's going on. And so they send me information. They send me links. And I go like, okay, thank you. You're still not going to get my money, but, keep sending me information. Yeah. So, well, I am so glad to have had this opportunity. And if you have further questions, I can put my email in the chat. It is gfisher143@verizon.net. gfisher143@verizon.net. And if I don't know the answer, I will go dig it up and send it to you. So again, I want to thank everybody. So, and that's one of the issues. Stephanie says, I think we need to hear some of our politicians speak about this topic in a more detailed way, instead of just mentioning Project 25 without elaborating on it, or just using the hot topics, because they're more than the topics we hear them speak about or that we see on the news. There is something that affects every single person's life in this country. Every single, even those who think, well, I'm on the conservative side, but there's some stuff that you don't even want happening to you, but they don't talk about that. They don't talk about that. For example, if you have an adoption agency, you can prohibit single people from adopting under Project 2025. Because they said, well, we believe in this nuclear family, got to be a heterosexual couple, married, so we will not adopt. We will not, let you adopt. And so what is the effect of that on kids who need to be adopted? Or we can say, well, you're Muslim, so we won't permit you to adopt. You're Hindu, we won't permit you to adopt. And so everybody is affected in some way. But right now the politicians are using the hot topics. And even with abortion, they need to say this is more than abortion. This is more than abortion. Because again, the same medicines, the same implements, the same procedures used for abortion are used for a whole host of gynecological issues that will be outlawed. Why? Because you use the same implements that can be used for an abortion. Okay.
Reverend Eric, did you have a question you wanted to raise? So you had one in the chat. I think you can unmute.
Yeah, I don't see anymore. Yeah. So if there are no other questions, everybody go get a cold one to digest it.
Well, again, I want to thank you so very, very much, and oh, it's a new message in here. Let's see what this says.
Okay. The anti-abortion one is one that puzzles me. As I said, the replacement level birth is low. And if you don't have enough babies to replace the current generation, what happens? And it all goes back to patriarchy. A woman's body under 2025 is not her own, and children are men's property. And so how dare you kill my property? How dare you stop, having babies? Again, the whole law of coverture, that a woman has no identity apart from her father or her husband. And so that's again why marriage is going to be promoted. You need to be married. Now, some folks don't want to be married, and others ought not be married. But to say that is what is valued in this country, to almost make it a law, just takes away your agency. Okay. Okay. Traditional wives, now a thing. Yeah, you'll be a thing again. Your husband, yeah, you'll belong to your husband or your father. Yeah. I mean, some of us remember when spousal rape was not illegal. Why? A woman's body was her husband. He could do anything he wanted. And that was in the 90s that law came about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you much. So,
okay, well then I'm gonna suggest I wonder if Reverend Eric can be unmuted, so I'm gonna ask him to pray us out. Can you unmute him, Steph?
there he is. Oop.
Are you there, Reverend Eric? Volunteer you all the time.
I mean, yes, and we have a deacon in the house too.
Okay. Okay, that's for one of you guys, please, I would one of you pray us out. And I just
Reverend
want to thank you so much again, Reverend Gayle. It's not enough. I think all of us are just ecstatic about what you presented to us, and we're just so thank you for just being willing to give us this time and to share your knowledge.
Thank you.
And I think we're empowered to go forth and be Christians in this world who understand that we believe in, as God created us all to be loved.
There you
And
go.
we'll do our best to make sure that that love is always there in this country that we love and in the democracy that we believe in, you know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Reverend Stephen, if you'd send us forward.
Okay, good day to all of you. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, the greatest educator of all, you have on this day given us knowledge of things that are happening in our lives that we were unaware of. I ask you, O Lord, on behalf of my brothers and sisters, to give us the wisdom to understand this knowledge that you have given us and help us to spread the word and educate others. Because, Lord, this is not just about us, this is about you. So, for this great information, I thank you. And I pray that you continue to guide us in the name of your Holy Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. And may we go into the world in peace with the knowledge that you have given us. Amen.
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 Thank you,
Thank
everybody, for
you.
being here and attending, and go forth and do good.
Thank you. Have a blessing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Blessings.
Amazing.